Water and Sanitation Director General Dr. Sean Phillips says completion of the cross-border supply expansion will help alleviate water scarcity in Gauteng. The completion of the supply expansion is only expected around 2029. Delays in the second phase of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project have left South Africa's economic hub with insufficient supply. For more on this conversation, we're now joined by water expert Professor Anthony Turton. Prof, thank you so much for your time and for being with us this evening. Prof, what would you attribute Gauteng's water scarcity to? Do we have a water management issue?
Yes, good evening to you and the listeners. Yes, these things are always complex, and it's very easy to point a finger of blame at one individual. But the reality is that we do, in fact, have a delay on the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. This was caused, unfortunately, by the former Minister of Water Affairs, Nomvula Mokonyane, who tried to hijack the contracting process for reasons only she can explain. But that has been the cause of the delay. And as a result of that, even though the Vaal River system is full, the dams are relatively full, it means that Rand Water can't extract more water because other users also have rights, and they have to plan for future periods of time when there's drought. So it's a complicated thing. But in essence, what has happened in our water sector is that our institutions have come under enormous pressure, and some of those institutions are failing. So I believe that our biggest problem in South Africa is our failure of institutions at this point in time. And then, of course, that manifests as our single biggest problem, which is our inability to manage our sewage waste flows, which feeds back once again into our water problem. So that's as I understand the problem in South Africa.
So, Prof, with these problems that we're currently facing and the inefficiencies that you make mention of, how dire then is this situation, especially for the residents of Gauteng?
Well, Gauteng, I think, is going through a very difficult period of time and will continue to go through a difficult period of time, probably for the foreseeable future. I see that the mayor of Johannesburg has just made an announcement that they've got a policy that's going to bring about water security sometime in the future. It's not clear how that's going to happen because the plan itself is not very clear. So I think we can accept that with the ambiguity of the plan on the one hand, and the fact that we know that the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme has been delayed by at least a decade. This means that we're going to face acute shortages in the future. And then the way to overcome that would be to build storage in the system, in the municipal structures. But of course, that is not so easy to do because the procurement process takes time, and there's very often not sufficient space, physical space, to build large reservoirs in urban areas. So once again, we get back to the institutional factors of planning for these things, forecasting, getting the budgets aligned at the correct time. And then, of course, making sure that money isn't pilfered out of the system, because that, unfortunately, is what happens throughout the process.
And then does the quality of the water get compromised in this process, where we are trying to get the distribution right? What then happens to the quality of water that's running through our taps?
Yes, South Africa, because we are a water-constrained economy, has been built. The water systems have been built on what is known technically as an indirect reuse model. So what that means is that all of our sewage wastewater has to be returned back to the river at a very, very high quality, for the simple reason that when it goes back to the river, it then flows a short distance down the river to the next town, where it is now becomes drinking water for that town. So that is known as an indirect reuse. Other parts of the world have a direct reuse, where they simply take water directly from the sewage works, treat it to drinking standards, and recycle that. So we've opted for the indirect reuse model, and that is what the relevance of the green drop reporting system in South Africa is. Because if the green drop reporting isn't as close to 100% as we can get, it means that we are polluting our rivers, which are the feed source for our drinking waters. And none of our big bulk water treatment plants, including big plants like Rand Water, were never ever designed to take sewage contaminated water and make it safe for drinking purposes. So that's where the blue drop report comes in, because the blue drop is about drinking water, and you can see that the blue drop quality is deteriorating across the board, and that is being pushed down by the deteriorating green drop standards. So that's why those two things are connected.
So, Prof, I mean, you made mention that the mayor of Joburg has announced some of their plans with regards to ensuring that the residents of the city are having adequate water. But the South African Water Minister, Mr. Senzo Mchunu, has plans to overhaul the national water industry and strip the municipalities of the responsibility of distributing water to those municipalities. How do you believe this will work, and would it be to the benefit of these municipalities?
Look, I don't speak on behalf of the Department of Water and Sanitation, but I do know that there are professionals that work there, and they take this matter very seriously. They would not make a pronouncement like that unless they seriously thought it through. But what I would like to say, and what I can quite easily say, is that we must be very, very careful about the metros, because we've already had a failed metro down in eThekwini. That has failed. It is broken. It is unable to deliver the services required to sustain the local economy, and the very real possibility exists that Johannesburg could be not too far behind that. So if we don't get it right, I don't want to speak badly about any of the leadership, but the current mayor has been fraught with complexity from his original appointment, original infighting about who's going to get what portfolio and what have you. And there's really never been a clear, coherent plan, at least during the reign of the current mayor. So, we've got to get that right. We've got to get the leadership right. We've got to get the vision right. And, with all due respect to all those concerned, the plan that I'm hearing about, I haven't seen too much of the plan, doesn't really address what I consider to be the core issue. So, we've got to get real about this. This is not just a question of a couple of politicians sitting around a table and saying, the problem's going to be solved by next week, Friday. These things take time. They're complex problems. And, just the procurement to put in infrastructure upgrade, just the negotiation, for example, to get access to your servitudes if you have to expand your pipelines or something like that. These are complex, time-consuming processes. So that's not a quick fix by any stretch of imagination. And the very real risk runs that we face right now is that Johannesburg could face a situation where interruption to water supply starts to impact on the manufacturing sector, given the fact that there are a large number of factories that exist in the three metros in Gauteng. So, this is the real situation, and I think the Department of Water and Sanitation is trying its very best to intervene before that actually gets out of hand, having learned the lesson from what's happened out in Durban.
Speaking of such interventions, Prof, Parliament passed the South African National Water Resources Infrastructure Bill, and this bill provides for the establishing of the South African National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency. How do you believe this new agency will assist in ensuring that such delays and the dropping of the blue drop standards could be averted, and ensuring that South Africans get sufficient and efficient water running through their taps?
Personally, I'm not all that optimistic about the role of this new structure, because it's another state-owned enterprise, and we know that the history of state-owned enterprises in South Africa is not a good one. So we have at the heart of this problem that we're talking about now an ideological issue, and that ideological issue is the fear that the private sector would in fact be able to deliver things that government is unable to do. And that is an ideological problem, and that's got to be dealt with as a political matter, because that's really what it is. But my concern is that by centralizing all of these things, we're actually weakening what's left of the private sector capacity. And to be frank with you, the skills that we need to keep the water sector going are almost all in the private sector. If you had to ask me for a number, I would estimate that something like 90% of the skills needed to maintain the water sector are not in government, they're in the private sector. So the more you weaken the private sector for ideological reasons, the more you actually score home goals, for yourself. And that's not going to help the economy at the end of the day. So we've got to get our priorities right. Is our priority about employing the born-free generation? Because if that's what it's about, then we have to have economic growth in the order of better than 5% for the next at least 2 decades. And in order to do that, we've got to have stable water and energy supplies. And we have none of those at the moment. So we keep revolving around this ideological question. What is our priority? Is our priority creating full employment, creating prosperity for the people of South Africa? Or is our priority the slow, long-term destruction of the private sector? These are different policy objectives, and they both lead to completely different outcomes in the future.
And why do you believe there is that influx of skill, especially in this sector, Prof, more towards the private sector as opposed to government, where clearly the skill is needed more?
Well, the strange thing is that government positions are very well paid. I saw some statistics announced recently that probably a large portion of your middle class today are all government employees. A significant portion, which in fact about 10% of them in the top income bracket in the country. So they earn substantial amounts of money, close to R1 million a year, plus maybe even more. The mayor of Durban had just given himself a salary increase of almost R4 million a year. So that's what's happening in the public sector. In the private sector, it's completely different. The loss of skills to the private sector has mostly been to out-migration of skilled people who have left the country. So it's not that they've just gone from government to private sector. It's that they've gone to Canada, and they've gone to Australia, and they've gone to the United States of America. That's the problem. We've hemorrhaged a huge amount of our skills. And I've just come back from a couple of nationwide road shows, and I've just recently met with some senior people in the various government departments. And it's very clear that within almost all municipalities, you simply do not have enough qualified engineers. You simply don't have them. And there's also no pipeline to produce qualified people in the future. So we are really staring down the barrel of a gun, when it comes to this. And I mean, this is all policy related. This can all be rectified if there's policy reform. But under the current political set of circumstances, I don't see any likelihood that policy reform is going to happen in the near future.
And lastly, Prof, just before I let you go, I mean, still speaking on ensuring that the private sector plays a large role with regards to assisting with the crisis with regards to water. What do you think that would do for prices of water, especially for those in underprivileged areas who necessarily can't afford some of these basic needs? If we are putting the responsibility of this in the private sector, what do you think that would do to the pockets of those South Africans who might not necessarily be able to afford water prices that could possibly escalate?
Yes, there are a couple of myths that we need to dispel in this conversation. The one myth is that government alone can deliver services at an efficient rate. Well, we know from the distress that almost all of our state-owned enterprises are in that government is not good at delivering services. It's simply, if it gets too big to fail and it keeps on getting bailed out by central government, then it becomes inefficient at the end of the day. Look at the post office at the moment. The post office is in severe financial disarray, and in many parts of the country is closing down. So where I live, we don't have any postal service at all. So that's a myth. And I'd also like to just state something that's very important. When the USSR imploded, one of the reasons why they imploded was because the burden on the fiscus to bail out state-owned enterprises exceeded the capacity of the taxpayers to pay for it. So that's an important thing as well. So the flip side of that coin is you can go to any poor community, and there are many in South Africa, amongst the poorest of the poor. They can still afford to buy beer, and that beer can be delivered at a price that they can afford, and in a reliable manner where demand can match supply. So in other words, the private sector is not necessarily the evil thing. And when we talk about the cost of these things, there's an irrational fear there, because there's another element to the cost conversation, and that is, what is the cost of doing nothing? What is the cost of increasing unemployment? What is the cost of growing sense of despair in South Africa because people simply cannot get a job? So these are all part of the cost equation as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that government is the only entity that can provide the most efficient services. And I firmly believe that we are starting to see changes in that direction now. There's been a recent court case ruling that has made it very clear that citizens have the right to services and that the municipalities do not have the sole monopoly of service delivery. So if a municipality is unable to deliver that service, the court has now ruled that other entities can supply that service. So in other words, I think we are seeing a transition. This has been driven to a large extent by the collapse of the energy sector and the emergence from that mess of independent power producers. And we're going to very soon start seeing the same thing happening in the water sector where independent water producers are going to come out. Doesn't mean to say that they're privately owned and driven for profit only, but it does mean that they're going to be make use of private capital, and that it also means that they are going to be run and managed in a slightly different way to what we currently get.
All right, Prof. Turton, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. That was water expert Professor Anthony Turton speaking to us there about the water supply for Gauteng residents.